We have next a alumni of CIIS, Lakshmi Mayya, who will be speaking on sustainability and architecture within integral yoga communities. Lakshmi has quite a varied background. She did her PhD in East-West psychology, but she also holds a master's degree in design from Domus Academy, Milan, and a degree in architecture from RVCE, Bangalore, India. And over the last 21 years, she has experience in architecture and interior design across diverse scales and typologies with projects all over the world. So welcome, Mayya.
So yeah, it's really nice to be here. It's been, what, 5 years? And to explore this integral and integral consciousness and sustainable architecture. To begin with, I did like to introduce a small visualization exercise, and just only pose a few questions for you to reflect on in the background while I continue with the presentation. And so let's take a moment to picture a community space that you look up to, a community space that you belong to, or a community space that inspires you. And now, what is the built space of that community look like? What is the size, shape, and form of this community space? What is the access, and how do you get inside? How do you go outside? What takes you to this community built space? How does it feel somatically in this community built space? And now imagine a future community built space that you desire, and compare the form, size, the shape of this community built space of the future. And hold that picture in your mind while we continue with this presentation. The central point is that we are all co-creators in this, of our built spaces, of these places that we inhabit. The world that we shape, the world that we desire. And some of the key points to grasp this idea are that sustainability as it is practiced today has challenges when you look at it from an integral perspective. Now, the integral perspective necessitates evolutionary, multidimensional, inclusive, a conscious participation, which is integral, which is very important, and personal engagement. Now, the other topics that we're going to cover are embracing the yogi within, looking at ourselves, architects, designers, and others, to see ourselves as yogis or spiritual practitioners, and some of the examples from Auroville, the architecture from Auroville, the lifestyle, the way they communicate with their built environment. What can we learn from that? And then the last being, you are able to take these practices and apply in your community built spaces or in your personal built spaces. So just to go over sustainability quickly, the 3 pillars as explained earlier, I think Devdeep went over this as well, social, economic, and environmental. And the way it shows up in architecture is building building community spaces or build spaces that promote well-being, inclusion, community cohesion. Now, the economic sustainability looks at balancing profits with ethics. It focuses on a circular economy and job creation. It has a systemic perspective. It looks at pattern language, flows of energy, information, materials. The 5R principles in economic sustainability are refuse, reduce, repair, reuse, and recycle. Environmental sustainability, which is the most popular one, is responsible use of natural resources, better management of waste, minimal carbon footprint, and of course, technology. Now, the often sustainability is compared or equated with a performance-driven metrics or the objective, as we spoke about. In the last 2 days, we've been talking about how the objective is given more importance than the subjective aspects like the beauty, the aesthetic, the profound impact of built environments on our experiences or behaviors, and of course, the psychological impact and the symbolic connections with nature. So although there are diverse perspectives that are present and applied both in academia and in practice, I think the focus should be on an integrated, well, should is a very strong word, but the focus here is on an integrated approach to architecture. Now, what does sustainable architecture look like through a lens of integral consciousness? It should have multiple dimensions of reality, a transdisciplinary approach, an inclusive approach, which is inner, outer, objective, subjective, and of course, integral yoga and whole person psychology is what I am using as a framework for this research. And as we have spoken, Sri Aurobindo and Gebser have done immense work on the evolutionary aspect. And they all propose that we are at a threshold of an evolutionary shift, as we are all been discussing about the last 2 days. And it's from predominantly a mind-centered age of a reason that they call towards a inclusive, soul-centered, and soul referring to like a vast, deeper expression of ourselves. And the key idea here is a conscious integration and participatory awareness. So what would that look in architecture? Firstly, when you look at it from a consciousness evolution perspective, you can see that the stages of architectural history kind of matches with the evolution of consciousness. And I'm going to go deeper into this topic on the 30th of September, if you're around for the Gebser conference. And how do we access this integral consciousness and make it a reality in architecture? Now, a psychological and a whole person based framework can really help us here, and especially psychic transformation of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo's theory of evolution and involution, he talks about how evolution can only happen when you go inwards towards, you go through the different layers, and then that's when you get at the soul out, the core of our being. And from there, designing spaces, from there, designing soulful spaces, what I call ensouled architecture. And so, yeah, there is yoga. I propose that there is yoga here, where the architects, the creators, designers, us, can become yogis or spiritual practitioners. It's like a shaman who's, working between the inner and the outer worlds. And yeah, that's the concept of the yogi here. And Sri Aurobindo really focused on how the spirit is what is the most important in the built environment. He spoke about how architecture, the external, the aesthetics, the experience, the economic, all those aspects are important, but the spirit is very important. I think this is what he was talking about. The soul is very important. Designing from soul is very important. One example you can look at is Golconda's story when the ashram was growing in the 1930s, they appointed Antonin Raymond as an architect, and from Tokyo, I believe, yeah. And he proposed to finish the project in 6 months and get 500 skilled laborers. And Sri Aurobindo immediately said no. He intervened and he said, no, the sadhaks will be the architects. They'll be the workers. You teach them. So instead of 6 months, it went on to a decade. It took about 10 years to finish Golconda. And they use like old utensils to melt it and use it as construction material. Reinforced concrete was used in India for the first time. And yeah, it is absolutely beautiful. I'm sure people who have visited Golconda here can talk about it. I have some images here that talk about, that show some the beauty of Golconda. And yeah, another important part is the karma yoga that we kept talking about the last 2 days. Through action, you become the architect, you become the designer, go work on site, learn through that. Let that be a spiritual experience for you to create spaces, whether it's your personal space or communities build spaces. That's the main central theme around this presentation. This is from the architect. The purpose of the dormitory was not primarily the housing of the disciples. It was the creating of an activity, the materialization of an idea by which the disciples might learn, might experience, might develop through contact with the erection of a fine building. And I think that's beautiful. Auroville was formed in 1968. The vision came to the mother in the 1930s, and she appointed, I forget his name, sorry, Roger Anger. She appointed Roger Anger, and it was endorsed by UNESCO, and as we spoke about the last couple of days, envisioned for 50,000 inhabitants from across the world. The Matra Mandir, the city's center, symbolizes the soul of the city. And from there are 4 zones: industrial, cultural, residential, and international. And currently, as of 2018, there are 2,800 inhabitants from across 54 countries living in Auroville. Now, just going through the design and aesthetics and the form and the symbol of Matra Mandir itself. Those who have been there, they know I was there when it was still under construction in 1998 as a student of architecture. And it was beautiful. We were climbing up the stairs. The stairs were still getting built, and just construction site, and it was grand. It gave me, I remember being dizzy at that time, and I was young, and I knew something is happening to me back then. I didn't know what then. And that place can invoke so much. It forces you to go internal. And that, I think, is a beauty that built spaces can do. They can bring that out. It's an expression of ourselves. It's a signature of us and how we keep our spaces, how we relate to our built spaces. Some information about Matra Mandir and the beauty. This is the inside inner chamber and the crystal globe. Absolutely beautiful architecture. It's breathtaking architecture. Some of the sustainability practices that are at present in Auroville are experimentation in construction. There's wastewater management plants, infrastructure. design management, water harvesting, renewable energy integration, multiplicity of styles from around the world. There's so many architects from different parts of the world that live on site with the other architects and build there with, they use natural materials, they honor the indigenous practices, local wisdom. And it is a delight for an architecture student to go study and learn from Auroville. Some of the architects who work there are Roger Anger, his house in Auroville, Papa Pingle. This is Anupama Kundu, extremely beautiful architecture. Some images. There are other architects who work there, like Bhaskar, Dharmesh Jadeja, and the Auroville Earth Institute. This is only to talk about Auroville. There are many other eco-villages around the world who might not call themselves integral, but they're still doing a similar work. They're still creating soulful architecture. They're still having a mindful community space and creating together, building together. And that's happening in different places. But the question is, how do I participate as a layman? How do I contribute to this sustainability? And that's the question that I ask. And thank you. To go back to that exercise we did early on, if you can now go back and imagine the community space with no limitations and look at it from more integrality and connectedness, what does this community serve? What are the public and private spaces? How is the community balancing the ecosystems? How are the non-human beings related in this community built space? And what it is for me now? How do I move forward? What does it invite me to do in the present, in the now? And these are some of the questions that I would like to leave with and open up for questions. And yeah, I just leave some of these questions for you to reflect on and take it back with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you so much. I feel so grateful that you're in the world and what you're doing. Thank you so much. And your talk takes me back to when I first moved to New Mexico in 1994. I was blessed to live next to a woman named Donna House. She's a Diné or Navajo woman. And she had already been given the assignment to be the landscape architect for the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. And even though it actually only opened a decade later, she was working on it for that entire decade. And the way she did it was to go to Washington, D.C. in 1994. And she took a canoe down the Potomac River. And she time traveled in her mind back to the time of pre-contact. And she reimagined the way the landscape was then. I mean, this is truly integral. It's truly time-free. And then she worked very closely with the architect who was, for a decade, with the architect who was creating the building. And this seems to be what you're doing. You're doing this beautiful thing. It is so important what you're doing. And you've dissolved the barriers between the inner and outer. And it's just, feel very grateful. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you very much. It was lovely. I have a home in Auroville. It's in Sunship. Are you familiar with it? It's a beautiful, it was designed by Ananda, who is an architect from the ashram. And and from your presentation, when I met Ananda, I said, you create such beautiful, beautiful homes and buildings. Where did you learn it? And he was very humble, and it has to do with your presentation. It's beautiful. He said, I trust the divine works through me, and all I do is hold the pencil and the paper. So it's exactly what you were saying. It's coming from the soul. And it's a fabulous building in Auroville, Sunship. So I invite anyone, if they're there, to check it out.
Thank you for your presentation. It's more kind of, it's conceptual, it's visionary, it's something we want to have to be. It's not what we are yet. Yes. And being in Auroville for so long, seeing all those nitty-gritties and all that architectural struggles and fancy things built and then demolished, and being not practical and being out of anything belonging to 60s ideas and stuck there with 60s ideas of Roger Anger also, though he's a great visionary of Matre Mandir because Mother imposed on him the force. I must tell you that it's all in the making. We are what we are outside, what we are inside. So many of those projections, fancy projections, were made into the buildings, into lifestyles, into that ecological thinking of sustainability, whatever we understand by that word. But truly speaking, the real soul architecture is still waiting for us in the future. We have to have those individuals in the community, which we hardly have. So those really open individuals who will build collective consciousness, and it can come only through individuals. It cannot come from collective. People believe that collective consciousness exists by itself and it makes individuals. It doesn't make it. You have to do your work. And we know it from Sri Aurobindo, that he didn't believe in collective, neither meditation, nor even collective consciousness. Mother has a little different turn on this, yeah? She believed in collective collaboration, she was telling us. But again, only through individuals. And if these openings will happen, there will be new architecture. So I welcome your presentation so much. But we have to connect with that inner work and then see what happens outside. Yes. I wanted to say that that this is idea is great, but till only Matre Mandir was accomplished in that sense. Thank you.
Can I just, though I'm the moderator, I just want to sort of respond to that, if you don't mind, as somebody who's lived in Pondicherry for 40 years and engaged very closely with Auroville for many decades. I appreciate both perspectives. I think it's important to acknowledge the incredible work that has happened, which you have shown us. And sometimes it's easy to take this for granted because it's there. But I feel when we look at the progression that it represents over decades, it is extraordinary. And at the same time, I acknowledge and recognize what you are saying, Vladimir, that we cannot, rest content on our laurels. We have to move forward and always progressively manifest newer and newer forms. But I just feel that both perspectives are important to acknowledge.
Right, thank you. Thank you for both perspectives. From this perspective, I think, yes, there are, this is an ideal, it can be an ideal and it can be something grand, but it doesn't have to. And that's why my focus is to bring that down to what can I do now? These examples, whether it's Auroville, whether it's outside of Auroville, they are just examples. And you take the things that are working there, they've done the work already. the 30, 40 years of work that they've done, they've already laid that foundation for you. So take that part and add on depending on what the future brings for us. And that is sustainable, not just what has happened till now and that's worked very well, but what is the future generation? Now, the AI, with the AI too, you have to accept, there has to be a radical acceptance of the future generations as well. What would that look like for buildings with the AI built in, with the progressive, the younger generation, what they are coming up with? So all that, but right now, what can I do? How can I be a sustainable architect or designer, even without being a designer or an architect? Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of moving ahead, but also relating to, my query is, how do we relate soulful architecture to movements like Bauhaus movement and a kind of think of a contemporary soulful Bauhaus movement, which would meet the challenge of social inclusion in various levels. Secondly, in terms of design, it also is a rethinking of the very notion of architecture and design. I think your idea of architecture yogi is very inviting, and it can relate to very interesting design theories. For example, Arturo Escobar has a very interesting book called Designing the Future. And my final submission is about integral and the transdisciplinary. Now, there is an emerging engagement with the transdisciplinary, and it requires further elaborations. How can the integral help us to deepen and widen the contemporary discourse of the transdisciplinary, including architecture?
Thank you so much for your talk. What was coming to mind was a little bit of when at the time that I've spent in Auroville, I had a friend who we had discussions about the architecture and how the mother in her work on her own body was looking at creating a dynamism in the material plane. And so this notion that you're bringing up, this sort of like a soulful architecture that is, and if you tie together some of the other two talks, we're talking about that trans-individuation, that nexus between, the thought came to us that really, and it's been a long time since we talked about this, but that the architecture may need to be designed in a way that can be dynamic so that it's not a fixed kind of architecture. Like Macha Mandir could be the thing that stays, but everything else could be something made of materials, made of in a certain way so that the needs are in the moment as the community grows, as conditions change, turns into something. And as the individuals in the community start to come to their own yoga, so that at each moment, Auroville is never finished. There's no like, okay, now we need to get it done. We have 50,000 people. That's not the goal at all. It's a constant laboratory. It's a constant movement, right? So then we can't have completely fixed in stone kind of places for hundreds of years, because it's always got to move and be more dynamic, just like the mother working on the cells in the body being more plastic. So that was a thought that came to mind when you mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That just to add to that, I believe that if you, for me, a lot of theorists talk about this, the city or the community itself as a being having a soul. So, for example, Auroville being a city and Matrubandir being the soul, the way it was designed too was like a new birth in consciousness, lifting up that ball of gold, the golden ball with the 12 petals. It gives, that's the soul. So how can we have a a being that's always growing, that's always being, as in the architecture being always growing, always it's a state of growing. City is never done, it's always building, right? Thank you.
One question to you. What do you think about the galaxy format, the galaxy idea? Because this idea of dynamic is very beautiful. And if it is laid in stone and ferrocement, those, houses, it becomes less dynamic.
I agree. I think the concept is beautiful. I don't know about the materials, how much you're bringing in. I know there was a lot of material steel brought in from outside, and that I'm not sure if I really resonate with. As I like that circular economy concept. You're doing it in your area, in your country, in the materials that are present there, and that makes it more evolving, more moving than bringing it from somewhere else and putting it there. And I think that's what makes it real and here. Does that answer your question? Kind of.
Last remark, small. I always envisioned this galaxy plan as the matrix, as a yantra, as a concept which has to be kept in the mind while building the city. And the city has to be built in a freer manner, as you suggest. Always thought about it. By the way, to mention Arthashastra, it's a quite interesting thing. There is a proposal there to build a capital for the king. So once all the parts of the city were laid out, some academician from St. Petersburg tried to lay it out on paper. And he noticed that it doesn't fit. Interesting. Yeah? And at the end, it is written, Ya evam Veda, the one who knows thus will build proper city. How come it doesn't fit into the physical form? Everything described there is an ideal. Knowing that ideal, you will build the right city. So I thought about this galaxy plan exactly in those terms. It's an ideal.
Yeah.
Seeing which you will build the right city. So I welcome your idea also of dynamism and your idea of going with soul architecture forward.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lakshmi, for stimulating so much discussion.